this latest year, when we do a comparison of proxy filings through June versus proxy filings through June of last year, we've seen about a 5% drop actually. So it seems we might have hit a peak last year. It's still the case that the companies that adopted these measures for the most part are keeping them, and are maybe having those discussions about what the risks might be going forward, whether it makes sense for them to continue to use them. And a lot of them are keeping the measures, in a lot of cases, just modifying either how they're disclosed, or making them about broader topics that go beyond just diversity to broader issues of workplace practices, employee engagement, retention, etc. I think for most of the ones that did drop that diversity measure, it's likely that they were reacting at least partly to that. We know a lot of companies also received direct legal action or legal threats from certain groups that are opposed to diversity efforts at companies. So obviously those companies had actually something they can point to as to maybe why they were backtracking or moving away. I think other companies are, if they weren't part of that group, are aware of what's going on out there in terms of the backlash to diversity efforts at corporations, and we're kind of trying to get around it. But again, what we haven't seen necessarily are companies just dropping, like let's say they had a percentage of their bonus program tied to something either diversity or workforce related. They're not dropping that component that sort of was tied to how to improve outcomes, sort of workforce related measures. They're keeping that. They're maybe just shifting it away slightly from diversity. I think in some cases it might just be a kind of a disclosure play. Some companies, are still actively trying to improve their employee diversity, trying to improve retention among diverse groups in their companies, maintaining employee resource groups for different, for different types of people. They're keeping all of these actions, but at least in the bonus plan, because it is so, or in the incentive programs, because it can be so, there can be so much focus on it, and there could be so much media attention that could be paid to it. I think for some of them, the calculus was to maybe bring that back a little bit while still maintaining some of the actions that they're doing in-house. I think there's also somewhat of an understanding that sometimes incentive measures are also often used as a signal to the market, to employees, to kind of all the company's stakeholders of where their focus is, what they are focused on. And that can be financial. They're saying we want to get earnings per share up, or we want to get revenues up, or whatever. By incorporating diversity or ESG or different types of measures more broadly, right? It always served as a signal of what they were really, what they wanted their employees and their suppliers, et cetera, to know that they cared about. I think by the same token, that can also kind of be a bit of a double-edged sword if the market is not reacting to that signal in the way that they would have liked. If we take like the Starbucks example, for example, they had a diversity measure. They've kind of switched it to one that's what they call a belonging measure, or a talent and belonging measure. And in that sense, it's kind of using a broader term that I think can encompass diversity within it, even if they're not saying diversity, the term diversity itself. In some other cases, it was definitely kind of a shift from, all right, we were measuring diversity to now the measure is related to an engagement survey result, which arguably is not quite the same. Even though I guess you could potentially argue that you would get better engagement results if you are achieving the benefits of a more diverse workforce. We saw it with Johnson and Johnson as well. So they previously had a whole category in their bonus plan that was tied to ESG, and they specifically used the term or they used environmental, social, and governance as the component. And then they switched it in the most recent year to just an enabling our purpose. That's what they called it, metrics. And within that, they have a list of kind of their achievements around safety, quality, and they had last year meeting DEI and inclusion goals, including improving representation for female VPs and US Black and Hispanic directors. They took out that entire part of the plan for this year. So it looked pretty similar, but it was clearly moving away from any references to ESG and any references to diversity as well. I think it'll partly depend on whether each company was kind of fully committed to what they were saying that they were doing in the first place. I think in some cases, some companies might were including these measures, but not in a very sort of substantial way. Sometimes they weren't quantitative. They didn't have a weighting like we were just talking about. And maybe the references to diversity were included in the disclosure, but there was really not much backing it up. In those cases, those companies dropping a reference to diversity isn't really going to make much of a difference if they weren't really, walking the talk behind the scenes in what they were doing day to day. For companies that are committed, I do think there's a risk of progress and action on diversity efforts slowing down if the kind of the messaging around it, that messaging right applies to employees too. In some cases, some of these bonus programs, go down the organization. It's not just the top executives that are participants in an annual incentive plan, which sometimes goes down to VP, director levels, and so forth. And so if those measures get dropped from the plan, I think there's a risk that there's less, attention being paid to these issues. There's a risk that, the data is not being tracked in terms of, what are our engagement results for different types of employees, or what are retention results for different types of employees, and really identifying where there are issues. If you're not measuring it, if you're not tracking it, if you're not reporting on it, it's possible you won't you won't make the progress that you had initially set out to do. Luckily, I think a lot of companies that truly are committed to improving workforce diversity for their company or for the labor force more broadly, I think in some cases, maybe they might have dropped the measure to avoid the legal risk, but it's possible that they're still making that good progress and adopting or maintaining certain types of policies that would hopefully keep moving the needle.